Hello, everybody. We're going to get started. I'm James Allen, and I'm the Cultural Programs and Special Projects Officer at the Columbia Institute for Ideas and Imagination. And this evening, I have the great pleasure of introducing Xiaolu Guo and Madeleine Schwartz. Xiaolu Guo was one of the Institute's inaugural Abigail R. Cohen Fellows in 2018, and it's so wonderful to have her back tonight. She's what we call one of our Forever Fellows. And for those of you who are new to her work, Xiaolu is a Chinese-born British novelist, a memoirist and filmmaker. She was born in China and published 6 books before moving to Britain in 2002, where in 2013 she was named as one of Granta's best young British novelists. Her books include Village of Stone, shortlisted for the Independent Foreign Fiction Prize, a concise Chinese-English dictionary for lovers, shortlisted for the Orange Prize, and I Am China. Her memoir, Once Upon a Time in the East, won the National Book Critics Circle Award, was shortlisted for the Costa Biography Award and the Rathbones Folio Prize in 2018. It was a Sunday Times Book of the Year. Her novel, A Lover's Discourse, was shortlisted for the Goldsmiths Prize in 2020. Xiaolu has directed several award-winning films, including She, a Chinese, and documentaries about China and Britain. She was a judge for the Booker Prize in 2019. Tonight, we will hear about Xiaolu's new novel, Radical, a provocative memoir and an intercultural feminist lexicon of a sojourn in New York that upended Guo's sense of self as a woman, partner, mother, and artist. We will then watch Xiaolu's short documentary, Rocks Remember, where she mixes archives and performance, the sacred and profane, poetry and realism, and a reflection on the relationship between the deep time of rocks and anthropocene. We're also extremely pleased to welcome Madeleine Schwartz, with whom Xiaolu will be in conversation. She is editor of The Dial, a magazine of international writing, and she writes for The New Yorker, the New York Review of Books, and London Review of Books. She lives in Paris, where she teaches journalism at Sciences Po. This event is organized in collaboration with Columbia Global Centers Paris, and we are also joined, later we will be joined by the Red Wheelbarrow Bookshop, and you'll be able to purchase copies of Radical after the event. I wanted to close by sharing the blurb found on the cover of Radical, which you'll be able to see later, written by another Forever Fellow, Deborah Levy. When it comes to spinning light and shadow on the complexities of living, loving, and language, Xiaolu Guo is one of the most valuable writers in the world. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. It's good to know who in Paris doesn't like to go on vacation. Thank you for spending your evening here with us. Xiaolu's going to read in a second, but before, I feel compelled, since the books haven't arrived, to just show off this book, which is really a wonderful book that I hope you will buy, whether from this bookseller or on your own afterwards, as soon as the talk ends, because it's really just a very moving exploration of self, of being a woman, being a writer, and also a very formally innovative work. And I hope that we will get into all of those things tonight, but this is my one sales pitch for the evening, so take note of it. Do you want to start off by reading a little bit from the book?
It's difficult to describe this book. I always say, Madeleine knows my work very well, actually. Thank you so much. Anna James, Anna Justine here. I was here some years ago when Marie, she should be here, but anyway. So all these memories, I think I went to New York after the year here in Paris in this institute. And that was before the pandemic. And it was a book supposed to be about different political and urban landscapes in the US, in the UK, and in China. And I went through a quite strange journey when I was in New York. So you find surprising materials in my book. I find it difficult to describe because I'm a documentarist, which means all my books are very much based on my diary, my note. And then really I write all my books, fiction or non-fiction, with or from my notebooks. And they are the very much of the 90% of materials I get from. Very little research in a way. And my films too, I think tonight it was perfect kind of documentary work. So I might begin to read a little section in the Radical book. But it's difficult to describe as because each section is very short, sometimes half page, no more than 2 pages, one section. And I think that's also just my patience and attention threshold, and also my respect to you these days. I think it's a struggle to keep attention, your focus, away from social media, away from this bombarded media. And to be a traditional reader is incredibly hard. It's incredibly antisocial. And that's how I felt. I'm really some kind of old-fashioned 18th century, 19th century traditional writer, which, defended my solitude, my strange, old-fashioned Don Quixote-like life and hidden away. Yet this book is so private, but now published in the public space. So again, I felt very strange. One of those Anne Sning moments when, Anne Sning in Paris, when she wrote all her private daily life, and then suddenly those books become huge thing. Not because of association with Henry Miller or that, but because book is very strange object, and it's almost like somehow, you sleep on your pillow, and then that pillow become a public object with your smell and your very personal dreams and memories. So I felt the same. This object, the book, called Radical. So this little section is in the end of chapter 1, and it's about this one night when I arrived in New York. I was doing a year teaching in Columbia University, and just the first week, I couldn't sleep at all. I think it took me some weeks to settle to sleep. And it's a little section about my own strange self-discovery after leaving my own family, and just to search for a certain kind of freedom beyond a woman's house, beyond a woman's room. So, like a sleepwalker, I wandered without direction. I was aware that there were no stars in this part of New York. Even the Hudson River was completely illuminated by both sides of the cityscape. And New Jersey was out there with millions of lit buildings, as awake as Manhattan. I walked down the slope of the riverbank. I noticed my shoes were wet, and one foot was on a rock submerged in the water. I could see almost everything on the fluid surface. I could see algae, some little drifters, a Coke can. I bent down and half sat on a branch which spread out behind me. I saw something moving in the wet sand, a little creature. I brought my face closer. I could see what it was. Then another airplane passed. I looked up. Where are they coming from? Sorry, I need a stand in this situation. Thank you. So this time, I saw this little creature, a little crab, digging in and out beside my feet. Yes, a little crab, gray, modest, and discreet. Then it disappeared in the water. I waited for a while by the Hudson to see if I would find the little creature again. It must have been past midnight by now. I decided to return to my apartment. Then I went back to bed and read about crabs molting. When a little crab molts, the old shell softens and erodes away, while a new shell forms. At the time of shedding, the creature takes in a lot of water so that it will expand and it can crack open the old shell. The creature must then extract all of itself, including its legs, the lining of the digestive tract, its mouth part, and eye stalks. And this is a difficult process that takes many hours. And if a crab gets stuck, it will die. I could not help but trying to imagine the two eye stalks been prized out of their encasements. Thank you. After this process, the crab is finally free from its own bony prison, but it is extremely soft, and it must hide until its new shell has hardened. So the little thing I saw in the shadows of the Hudson River could have been hiding away after molting. Or might it have been on its way to mate? Apparently, mating happens just after a female crab has shed its old skin. The home of a crab is its own shell. It lives in that home for a while, then abandons it, and then creates a new one. That's not unlike us humans. Our house is the exterior of our bodies, and then we can move out or abandon that house or make a new house. But some people get stuck in their lives and are unable to come out. Just like some crabs. They die in their old skins, unable to fully molt. The heating was too high. I opened my windows, and I stood there for a while, watching the sky and the river blow. While the chilly wind blew my hair, a tumble of thoughts flew about like troublesome insects. I thought of the fact that I was in the US by myself, having left my child and her father in England. What was I doing, pacing around at midnight in this foreign city? Perhaps I was searching for adventures and encounters, and ultimately, some sort of freedom that I had never had in China or in Britain. But what was this freedom? Illusion, delusion, or unrealized possibility? Or was it the freedom beyond a woman's house, with or without a room of her own? My thoughts were insubstantial and weightless. The night river was real, and so were the lights of New Jersey on the other side. Was there freedom in this city? I thought of women's freedom, then I thought of children, family, possessions. Then I thought of the physicality. That's the physicality of the paper. Of female bodies, thanks, under the judgments of society. To find freedom, you have to be able to describe yourself and where you are in your life. I knew that a vocabulary fit to describe the limits of women's freedom had already been forged by generations of feminists and by contemporary social media. But this is generalized vocabulary for all women, whether white or black, whether working or unemployed, whether married or single. And in this, I could not find a lexicon for myself. Each woman needs to find her own words, that private, special vocabulary she can use to express her own condition. To make these words her own, she needs to embark upon an etymological journey deep within herself. The words that will be in her possession can be shared, but not turned into slogans. And they cannot be taken away from the particular. And in that sense, I'm neither woman nor Asian. I'm neither worker nor oppressed citizen. I am just a human who cannot overcome or deny a very specific past, set in stone, real, rich in detail, loaded with a finely wrought mesh of social baggage. I had been enveloped in the sense of my own troubled reality since I arrived in America. I felt threatened by a deep separation from my past and by being in between words. I was experiencing a dreadful sense of incompleteness. A thick melancholy like the fog upon the Hudson lay on me. If a crab had its own private lexicon, fit to describe its own sentient history, then what is my lexicon, which describes its being that I am? And I, this person looking out at the dark Hudson River now, had these feelings that could not be caught in a net of ready-made words, no paved over by any familiar lexicon. And if we are honest, we must acknowledge our deep need to communicate beyond the rigid vocabulary of feminism and politics, and to reach for an etymology that is authentic, yet to remain uncategorized. Thank you. Thank you for this traditional paper taking.
Well, I'm so glad that you read from that passage, because it gets to what I think is such an interesting question at the heart of this book, which is freedom something that we feel with regards to other people, or is it something that we come to feel with regards to ourselves? And where does that feeling come from? Is it something that we can make, or is it something that is brought about by circumstance? And I hope you'll tell me what the answer is.
It's a huge question. It's very political question about freedom, but also very private question about female freedom. And it's in a way, the concept of freedom is so elastic. I think for someone like me from China, I never had voted in my life. And I think voting was kind of a symbolic gesture of what a political individual could do, in a country as a citizen. So I think when I was living in China, I think the idea of freedom was something so grandiose, so it's so beyond the identity of being female or being a writer. It's this historical political gesture written in the novel or political movies. And then when I left China, I came to the UK. Still, I couldn't vote for 20 years because of the legal situation. And then finally, this idea of freedom was exercised when I had this British citizenship. And I think 20 years later, I was able to vote as a British. And then that was the first time I voted, was Brexit. And I voted, of course, remain in Europe. And then I realized voting, the mere act of voting didn't change. Actually, it was tragic outcome. And I think that was the first time I realized what it means, this strange, elastic, I mistaken as pure political concept, freedom. And I think that's very intellectualized. The Chinese is kind of almost rigid, idiotic idea about freedom, And I think what's within me, after that first voting in my life in Britain. And finally, I think I began to sort of immediately connect to Virginia Woolf's idea, two things. A woman has to have £500 a year at that time to write, and then women have to have her own room to write. And I think, after Virginia Woolf time, 100 years passed. It means a woman have to have £50,000 to write, or €50,000 a year to write, and then women have to have her own house or her own room to write. Neither of these conditions is easier for any women. It's almost impossible. And I think from that sense, I became aware it's a very private matter. Freedom is not a slogan at all. It's political and private, and it's very difficult to grasp.
And one of the things that's really wonderful about this book is that you think through all of these different ideas about freedom and their meaning and what they mean for you, but also in a larger sense. And just for those who haven't read it yet and who haven't bought it yet, why were you in New York? What were you doing there? Because you were also looking for a writer who had his own ideas of freedom. So this book, first I think that the title radical, of course I'm playing with two concepts, but the radical, in Chinese meaning 不守,
radis, I mean Latin, radis, the roots of your words. Roots of your words in Latin sense, or roots of my words in Chinese sense is busho, or if you're Japanese, kanji. So it's the foundation of the building block of ideogram or pictogram, if you know a little bit Chinese or kanji character writing. So if you write dew, morning dew, you would have to draw a picture of rain, and then you will have to draw a path. So the rain on the path, that's morning dew. So that's the radical. It's made from 2-3 different radicals, become one Chinese ideogram, which is Chinese character. But in the West, in European language, which is alphabetical, speech, sound-based language, you have dew, D-E-W, which is not picture-based, so it's something else. And we can trace back Latin traditional, Anglo-Saxon Germanic tradition. So these are the foundation, I think, for this book. I thought I will play with this concept, radical roots of the words, roots of language, but I will embark this linguistic journey in a very much a foreign city, which was in New York. I was intended to live at that time before the pandemic. And I thought it would be great to use this method, which is bizarre method, to write about a country, a city I do not know, but it's a memoir. So I thought use that method, plug in or locate in this foreign place, and then I can trace back the memories in China, my childhood in China, and then my recent life in Britain. So this was like the 3 kind of triangle kind of foundation, the pillars for my writing. And I think New York came into the view because I was there. I'm really a flaneuse, a street writer. The very idea of to see America or New York from Walt Whitman's eyes. I guess we discussed about Whitman before, but I think you want to ask more about that.
Well, when we were talking upstairs, you were telling me about the movie that you were making at that time and the ways in which it was, and the people you met through it, including a modern-day Whitman that you mention and you describe in the book.
Absolutely. So I was there writing this book, teaching in New York a course called, I taught 2 courses. One is called Writing in Second Language, which is in New York, which is 90% of my class made from Latin American students and Asian students. So writing in second language became very challenging and extremely rich for me to learn from my students. And another course I taught called Migrant Literature. And it's about, we all kind of, one way or another, kind of migrants, by no choice or by decision. And my kind of literature, you can say, my writing a migrant writing. So these 2 courses, and I think also just drive me into the streets in New York because I'm a filmmaker, so I was trained as filmmaker from 19 and then onwards. I was in a film school forever in Beijing and then in London. So all my life was making films. So I thought these 2 subjects, the second language and the migration, I have to be in the street. I have to find my modern day Walt Whitman and somehow to get them to read the Whitman poetry. So I took those leaf of grass and I was staying in Harlem and I was filming all the, the residents in Harlem, mainly, immigrants from Latin America or Africa or much poorer immigrants in Harlem. And so they were reading, random page from Whitman's Leaves of Grass. And it was very interesting because they were in the streets, in the middle of they're on their way to work, or they have to go home. So the whole speech is in a hurry. They were reading in such a hurry. And it's almost like, meeting Whitman in Grand Central. So I went to Grand Central in all these streets because I thought, this is speed of New York and the way the poetry could or could not be read in such a speedy way. Because in Whitman's time, still, this grand nature out there in New Jersey for him to be, roaming around, to be naked, to writing all these poetries, as he wrote about his great freedom, in nature. So that was a sort of foundation for my little section to move through. And then one day I met a street poet called Mr. Robinson, who was sitting in front of New York Public Library. And he said, well, I'm a modern day Whitman, you should film me. I said, sure, I film you. Why? He said, well, I'm self-taught, self-published. Everything I did, like what Whitman, I'm on the street. It's just there's no more nature for me to be naked, to be roaming around like Whitman did. So I did film him, and he was there almost every Wednesday. And then he told me, I think he said, I have no more money, I'm homeless, I might not be able to make it next week. And that was the ending point. I stopped filming him because he disappeared from that Barron Park in Manhattan. And so he was in this book for a bit as kind of thread, and he disappeared in the middle end of my book as he disappeared in my New York life. So I did want to have this double project, the film project, following this Whitman in the street in modern days, and this kind of street beings, hanging out, try to find its own identity as an artist. Someone like me, although fortunate than some others. So these are kind of atmosphere of this book, Radical.
It's interesting because as the book sort of unfolds, the question of what freedom means for a woman becomes, I would say, more something that you're grappling with, and it deepens. And I wonder how you came to this question. Was it something that about which your ideas were changing over the course of the book, or one that feels resolved in any way for you?
Yeah, it's a very strange project because I wanted to write a dictionary, and I wanted to write a private lexicon graph. So that was my project that year. I'm gonna be in a new city. I'll be every day go to library. I write my private lexicon, which focused on female identities, female vocabularies, and I would use somehow Chinese words, Anglophone words, German words, French words, to pump into this dictionary, which would describe a migrant or multicultural person's kind of reference, linguistic and cultural reference. I refuse to write a single neat, narrative, plot-driven book without chaos. I refuse to submit a project without this digression and self-contradiction, lost in this linguistic maze. So I embarked on this etymological journey there. And so I think in the book it's quite strange, you began these Chinese words, "女," which means female. And the Chinese word, "女," women, the picture is really a woman kneeling down on the floor. And this very simple symbol, and you see her shape kneeling down. And that's ancient writing, jiagu, from the ancient, this turtle shell bones writing. And then later on, this character, female women, become more, kind of involved. And then I suggest, how come, the simple pictogram writing of female is such a tragic imagination? It's a reality, and then become imagination, they become our supposed identity. A woman kneel down doing what? A kneeling woman. And then I use a German word, Nietzsche's word, Übermensch, Superman or above man or upper man. What's the direct translation would be? Overman. I think that's the English translation. So Übermensch. So I said the man or Übermensch. In Nietzsche's term, what does that mean? How come we don't have the word Üben women, Üben female? And then I talk about women's menstruation. Could we feel this Übermensch, Üben women, when women going through this monthly, this painful, this physical transition, shedding out, our reproductive power? And so these are the strange kind of zigzag journey I went through in my book, and then immediately a lot of Germanic words came in. For example, one of the the Germanic words as my section title called Leben Künstler, meaning living artist. Leben Künstler is someone treat life as an artwork. And most time, Leben Künstler were women, but they were not portraited. Like women artists, women poets, amazing women painters, just being fantastic women is not treated as proper artists. Yet this word, Leben Künstler, Anglo-Saxon Germanic word, exists from beginning to the end. We don't apply to great women, even they might not be a professional artist. And I thought about what we are doing, most women in our life, with or without children, or with artistic gift or not, the gardening, the planting, the looking after, the all kind of perpetual womanhood, with aesthetic quality, which is not really measured, But the men there, as a Navy officer, as mariner, they were sang in the ancient poems. So those words are very, very important for me, and I was determined to introduce those Germanic French words into this English book or Anglophone book, but with my Chinese sense of that linguistic background. So it is a funny, a strange book if you read through, yeah.
I wanted to ask about the form of the book too, because you have these chapters that are very much ordered by these definitions in a way that's often very surprising and innovative. And I've been surprised, as someone who's read your work for a long time, that every time you describe your work, you describe it as documentary and documentarian, which seems at odds with the very careful way in which it reads to the reader as being very constructed and thought through. And I wonder, what do you mean by that? And what does being a documentarian mean when it comes to writing?
Yeah, very, very good question, but difficult to answer. I think the idea of documentary, of course, coming from my, just very long years of documentary training when I was in Beijing Film Academy in China. So I was doing documentary films for 10 years. Then I was teaching in Beijing documentary films. But in a way, I wasn't really completely just a documentary person. I was very much in love with Godard, or of course Jean Rouch. That kind of documentary, wonderfully embedded in the narrative. But then Pasolini's kind of poetic sense, and this kind of non-mainstream sensibility. But also like Eisenstein, all this they are much beyond documentary. They are just poetry, epic, visual making. Not much narrative. And I was coming from that tradition. But somehow, to be a documentarist is kind of a radical position, to be away from this mainstream, mere storytelling, mere narrative, plot-driven, sleepwalking narrative, commercial world, which I'm so dreaded. And I think the format of a novel becomes such a commodity. It was so scary for me, came to the West after published several books in Chinese language when I was writing as a Chinese writer. They were, most of the books, I think 5 of the books I published in Chinese, they were art critics, film theories. One was poetry and one was essay. It was a strange mix of essays and poetry. When I came to London, when I was 30 years old, I found myself writing novels, and I didn't call them novel. Somehow they were called a novel in a bookshop. And I think this sudden realization of the need that somehow, is it appetite from commercial feed, or is it authentic appetite of readership? I question about it. Because for me, it doesn't, I don't work in those terms, fiction or documentary. I think what's most truthful is I do not want this huge narrative fabrication, this artificial insertion in my books or in my films. I just think the reality out there is much rougher, much more violent than this perfect narrative. Or sealed, you can't breathe. There's no fragments for you to come out. so I was kind of my militant kind of persistence to call myself a documentary novelist. And because I make films, so I do make fiction feature films, but I always try to use street people, non-professional actors to act in my films. And it was funny, tonight we have also the film to show, which is really just, rocks. It couldn't be more documentary than filming rocks. What can we do with rocks with my camera? So I think that's my stand, I'm a documentarist, whatever books, film I make.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about the film before we see it?
Yeah. I guess we don't have much time left, so I speak a little bit about film, and then we have 22 minutes film, and then we can be open and just discuss, right? So rocks remember, rocks do not forget. I was, for years, I was using my credit card, debit card, making my feature films in Europe, because I couldn't get funding to make films. And I was living in Paris 12 years before as a resident. And at that time, I was able to make my fiction films because in Paris, I was a French resident, and I was able to apply for fundings. So I made a Chinese, how's your fish today, quite a few fiction feature films. Then I went to Berlin, and I think I couldn't function. I don't know how to work in Germany. And then I wrote my novels in broken English. Eventually I thought, it's very complicated. I was learning German and learning French, but I was writing in broken English. I may as well go back to England. So I went back to England, writing my English novels. And then I just couldn't find a film funding. Then I used my credit card, make very humble, just guerrilla street films. And then after some years, I made quite a lot of films. And then last year, Locarno Film Festival and Swiss-Italian State TV said, well, welcome back to Locarno Film Festival because you won the Golden Leopard a few years ago. So why don't you come to make a short film around Ticino region between Switzerland and Italy? But if you can also produce 10 little newsreel for us, then you have all the freedom to make it. So I said yes. So I remember I had to produce 10 night newsreel during the Locarno Film Festival, and then 12 days later, the film festival in August finished, and then finally I get my 6 days to make this film about rocks. So that was the real, the technical background. But intellectually, I always wanted to make film about, the speaking rocks, our human relationship to the most just essential, the most unspoken objects. And also I am allergic with narrative. I think it's almost, it's an illness, I worried about narrative, even though I wrote so many books and made so many films, but I'm very allergic to artificial narrative. And anything I can get away from artificiality of narrative, then I would do it. So I try to find the object, a stone, a rock, and it's symbolic enough to take you and me into deep time. And I thought that would be safe for me to go on this little journey with you, to do with nature, to do with much deeper time beyond humanity. And I can say in my voiceover, what I feel, with one rock or the other rock, what rock means, for us. So that was a vague kind of intellectual ideas when I was, preparing the film. But it was very much improvised. I didn't have a script. I had, I think, 3 days to film it. And then I had 4 days edit. And I think that was my summer. So hopefully you will like it. Yeah. It's the first time showing in the bigger space. I realized we didn't have cinema mix. So it's not your fault, it's my fault that we forgot to mix the film for a bigger space. I think so far I watched on small computer, which is strange for a filmmaker to be working in that kind of situation. Yeah.
So we thought we would open it up to questions. And before we do, I just wanted to mention that the books have now arrived, which is good news for all of us, and especially for you, since you don't have a copy yet. So if anyone has a question, can we... there are microphones already at your disposal. I have a lot of questions about the fashion sense of the people of Petra, Switzerland, but maybe you have other questions.
Thank you for showing. I was just curious, I know you're a documentary filmmaker, but you obviously shot the film in black and white. And that struck me very quickly because the whole scape to me was very moon-like and lunar and not really of the earth. That's what I just kept thinking about. And I'm just wondering, are you always shooting in black and white, or is it changing? Because it's obviously in Switzerland, it's so majestic with the colors.
Yeah.
And you chose to be, I don't know, was it how the landscape would speak in the black and white?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a great point. I had access to the archives you saw in the middle of the film, so I had, I think, several minutes in the middle part of the film, the archives from 1950s, how the Italian workers tried to build the tunnels for Switzerland. And I think in the modern days, if now you go to Switzerland, you go through the Gotthard tunnel. So all these amazing railways, the tunnels. Before was, Switzerland is locked, completely locked place. And now I think all these been built by the Italian workers from that time onwards. So those archives in black and white, and in very grainy, beautifully film camera. And so I had these two strange contrast materials, the archives, black and white. Then I had my colorful video footage, which I never really keen on this very superficial color, which filmed on a very sharp video camera. So I wondered how these two could connect together into one little short film. Eventually, I just decided, they should go just black and white. And also, to do with rocks, I thought the whole thing, I should somehow take away this realness. So it's very interesting when you mention this idea of documentary, and I think it's a huge argument, going on. What is realness? What is real? Is it to do with the materiality, or to do with the artistic interpretation, or to do with the authentic look on the materials or on the reality? So that was also my thinking during the editing, really, because the material is so different, the color video material and my archive material from 50s. And in a way, I thank greatly to those archives. It gave me the foundation, the weight of my silly, playful material I had in my own kind of silly performance. Yeah.
Did you ever shoot anything in color and then look at it and say, no, it's too vivid?
Well, all my footage, this footage with me in it is all color. And then all the archives are in black and white. So I only changed in the final day of editing. So what I was editing with color and black and white archive. And I never was kind of sure this can go together organically. And in the final day, actually, we need to deliver with subtitles, and we changed to black and white. And actually, it's a good question, because I didn't make one fiction feature film, with very long film called UFO in Her Eyes. And I did try the same thing, actually. There's a camera's POV was black and white. And then the whole village about the sighting of the UFO in this Chinese village was color. And that was also intentional, the color should represent a certain kind of reality with human eyes. And then the camera POV was a police investigation of the UFO sighting, and that was black and white. And again, I spent quite a long time thinking about the color give you very different visual reality. Not only that, but just your place in the film, the realness or unrealness in the film.
Thank you. I would say thank you for doing it black and white, because it changed the entire concept for me.
I agree, thank you.
Hello. Was just hoping you could tell us a bit more about the naming of the rocks, from the kind of probably improvisational process of that to putting,
Thank you for that question. I feel embarrassed about it, because I wish I prepared more. I didn't have a script, so I think Madeleine knows my other documentary films. So you wrote about them. I mean, often comes out in my film very clumsy. I mean, although, you know, they have their own kind of stylistic way of presenting an object. I find myself clumsy because I think I'm not a rigid, violent documentary filmmaker in the sense of I rehearse, I make sure this thing would work if involve some sort of strange narrative, because I didn't prepare. Also with my video maker, the camera person, we only have that hour. And I think it was so tight, the schedule, I thought, okay, we do something with the rocks. What do you do with the rocks? You can dance around, you can throw the rocks, or you can name the rocks. And I think that idea was 1 minute before the camera was rolling. Then I named the rock, but what's the name? What are the names? So that requires very fast. It's almost, you know, this silly kind of poetic, this kind of, you know, childish play. And I think that was the moment, the mistake, all the good things could happen, you know. And I always regret, you know, could I name again? Because I should say the greed in a different order, you know. I should name this rock as love or beauty, you know. I didn't have time to redo it. The next minute, you know, we have to chase that, you know, someone talking about the father on the mountain disappearing. So that was extremely improvised. Improvised isn't even a posh word. It just words coming out without thinking. And you can see my manner, and I think the first part of Naming Rocks slightly more, a tiny bit more elegant. Middle part was okay, and then the final part, when the film finishes, that was I think the first 10 minutes we began to shoot. So that was the sequence, Naming Rock, I least felt happy. And I felt deep regret, you know, if we could redo it again, but time is running out. We have to drive back to the city to edit and then deliver next day. So, you know, just full of this regret and a kind of dissatisfaction which comes with documentary filmmaking. And in a way I thought about, wow, you know, if I had funding, proper time, fiction approach, I would go back and do it with a script, name it in a more thoroughful way, you know. But there's no next day. So it's almost, you know, humble, silly, you know, sometimes. And I just have to live with it. Yeah.
I'd call it organic rather than clumsy.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, thank you. So my question, I hope, is not too broad, but how does your, I don't know if it's the right word to say, but dislike maybe of narrative kind of color your creative choice? Because if I understood you correctly, the choice of the subject was in part to avoid the narrative kind of constraints. I was just wondering whether this personal choice of yours affected also the creative side.
Thank you so much. I mean, I need to be very careful to talk about narrative, because I do think we are narrative animals. We're hopelessly narrative species. You know, I think the speech ability of human beings are the only unique ability amongst other, you know, amongst all animal species. So the ability to speak, to write, it's a huge narrative ability. So I should be very careful to mean, you know, what I mean. I'm allergic to artificial plotting, the way of insertion of that kind of narrative, you know, and I think that I have problem with. But I trust the you know, whatever good word you said, the organic narrative or intuitive, the almost, it's like what Benjamin says, you know, you have great idea there, but the moment you try to convey that idea from the head to your hands, the idea become gone, you know, it's a dead mask. And that's a process of narration happens. And I think that's a process of when I verbalize my idea from my brains to now verbalize this process, I have to make it sense to you. Making sense is narrative. So that's beautiful, but also extremely hard process when you're writing big book. I think, you know, 20 minutes film, I managed to do this, but I think with Radical, that book, I did work for 3 years every day. I didn't do anything else. And, you know, even though I say I don't want to have a strong, I refuse the artificial plotting, But I do need a narrative in that, so you can read more than 10 pages and say, I will go on because there's some tension there. And what is that tension is that emotional investment to something still propel you to make you wonder what's more there. And I think for me that's narrative drive without dramatic characterization in the traditional way. So that's something very difficult to explain, but indeed it came out after you writing a few books. And I think the more I wrote, the more I realized I do respect readers. I do want to be a good storyteller, but without cheap plotting, artificial, huge fabrication. You know, I do want this almost like effortless effort, but it's a huge effort to present that intensity without artificial dramas in it, you know. But then again, those languages are all rotten, you know. What is artificiality? Everything is artificially composed. It's purposely composed. I think there's nothing natural, you know. There's no natural beings, you know. All the natural things composed in a strange and unique way. So I can say, you know, the writers I love, you know, for example, you know, Nathalie Sahu, you know, or Raymond Cuny, those kind of writers, I felt easier to read than reading traditional novelists, you know. I find difficult to read, very classical novelists, you know. I feel more difficult to read Zola than the rest, for sure, you know. I felt huge effort to reading Balzac than reading, say Sartre even, you know, Sartre's novels, or, you know, de Beauvoir, you know. I felt so easier to enter their world, which is fragmented, more truthfully laid out than this incredible epical presentation from classical writers, which I felt, you know, being thrown out from the truth of our fragmented, chaotic daily life, you know. So that is very good, deep question, which I would need to write a PhD thesis to answer your question.
Just getting back to the film, I wondered if you were at all influenced by the great documentarist Paul Strand.
Actually, I haven't seen.
Well, he's the first one who put Walt Whitman to film with Mahatma, and he invented documentary film in Mexico in the 1930s and so on, always black and white. There's a festival of his work now in Paris if you want to catch it.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I have to catch that. I think.
But he was for the workers. He was very strong in the Communist Party, and he always showed the dignity of workers like you did here. And he worked a lot in Mexico, New Mexico, and a lot of rocks and that kind of barren landscape, yeah. Outer Hebrides, and also in Italy he was working as well, yeah.
That's great. I do think I love, you know, using the raw materials to write, to compose. And it's almost, I don't know if it's womanly or it's almost like the primitive way of narrative, you know. If the strong primitive materials are there, you know, why do we polish it in the studio, you know, in an artificial way, and to make it completely flawless, you know. I felt it's a waste of the strong textual, you know, in our reality. So I do share the sensibility.
And he was the first one to put serious music. And I loved your choice of music, Elgar, you know, it just took it to another level, yeah. Well, thank you very much for the film.
Thank
I
you.
love rocks.
Thank you so much.
Well, thanks everyone for coming tonight. Again, books are in the back, and have a wonderful rest of your evening.
Thank you so much. Thank you.